Theo Bryant was 34 years old when he finally hosted the housewarming party he'd spent 15 years working toward. Every board, every wire, every brick in that house was his, built with his own two hands, secured with a loan his grandmother co-signed when nobody else believed in him. His wife, Elena, had been distant for weeks, but Theo chalked it up to party stress, never once suspecting the truth walking up his driveway. Then, the U-Haul pulled in. Her mother, Deborah, stepped through his front door first, suitcase in hand, trailed by her father and brother carrying garment bags and boxes like they were moving into a hotel room they'd already paid for. The room went silent. Deborah looked Theo dead in the eye, smiled, and said 4 words that would end his marriage. "We live here now." Theo turned to his wife. She didn't deny it. She didn't even look surprised. And in that frozen moment, standing in the home he built alone, Theo understood something none of them did yet. He was about to show this family exactly what happens when you underestimate the man who holds the deed. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The kitchen smelled like cedar and fresh paint, and Theo Bryant could not stop smiling. He stood at the island counter, a solid slab of white oak he'd cut and finished himself, and straightened the collar of his navy button-down for the 3rd time. Outside the tall windows, the afternoon sun stretched long and gold across the backyard deck. His deck, built plank by plank over 2 weekends in October, his hands blistered by the end of each day. His house. The first guests arrived a little after 3. Marcus Webb, a drywaller who'd worked 3 jobs with Theo, came through the door with a 6-pack and a wide grin. "Man," Marcus said, turning a slow circle in the entryway. "You really did it." "Every nail," Theo said. He walked Marcus through the main floor, the way a man walks someone through something he loves. He pointed out the custom cabinetry along the kitchen wall, cabinet doors with recessed panels he'd routed himself, painted the color of warm cream. He knocked his knuckle against the hardwood floor in the hallway, a rich walnut that ran the full length of the house without a single seam showing. "No contractor discount on your own house?" Marcus joked. "Nope," Theo said. "Paid myself full rate." More people arrived. Neighbors from the cul-de-sac, a few of Elena's co-workers from the real estate office, 2 guys from Theo's crew. The house filled with voices and music, and the smell of the catered food Elena had arranged, pulled pork sliders and sweet tea, and a pound cake that sat on the kitchen island like a centerpiece. Elena moved through the party in a green dress, her hair pinned up, working the room the way she was good at, laughing at the right moments, filling glasses, touching arms. She was beautiful and social and charming, and Theo watched her from across the room with genuine warmth. But she kept checking her phone. Once by the fireplace, twice near the back door, a 3rd time while a co-worker was mid-sentence talking to her. Theo caught it each time. He told himself it was nothing. Party logistics, maybe. A catering question. Elena was the planner between them. He let it go. What he didn't let go as easily was the moment Janet Okafor, Elena's co-worker, always a little too chatty, leaned in and asked with bright, curious eyes, "So, where are your parents staying now, Elena? I heard things got rough with the house." Elena's smile didn't break. It just went flat behind the eyes, like a lamp dimming without turning off. "Oh, they're handling it," she said, and pivoted away so smoothly it almost looked natural. Almost. Theo filed it. That was something he did without thinking. The same instinct that kept his job sites organized and his contracts tight. He noticed things, stored them, kept moving. The screen door banged open and Margot Sims came in from the backyard, with mud on her good shoes and absolutely no apology about it. Theo's grandmother was 71 years old and walked like she was late for something important. She was small and brown-skinned, with white hair she kept cropped close, and she could silence a room with one look. She'd raised Theo from 14 after his mother got sick, working double shifts at the hospital laundry to make sure he stayed in school and stayed out of trouble. When she found him in the hallway, she grabbed both his forearms and looked up at him hard. "I walked the whole backyard," she said. "That deck is something." "I know," Theo said, grinning. "Don't you get smart." But she was smiling too. She patted his arm. 15 years ago, baby. You remember what you told me?" He remembered. He'd been 19, sitting at her kitchen table with a loan application spread between them. Too proud to ask, and asking anyway. She'd signed without hesitating. "I'm not doing this for the bank," she told him. "I'm doing this because I watched you build things out of nothing since you were this tall." "You told me you were going to build something worth keeping," Margot said now, looking up at the crown molding he'd fitted himself along the hallway ceiling. "And here it is." Theo put his arm around her small shoulders. "Here it is." The party hummed around them. Someone laughed too loud near the food table. A child chased the neighbor's dog through the back door. The music shifted to something slow and easy. For one long moment, Theo felt the full weight of what he'd made. Not the square footage or the appraised value, but the actual thing. The years, the early mornings, the calluses. Then someone near the front window said, "Is that a U-Haul?" The music didn't stop, but the energy in the room shifted the way air shifts before a storm. Subtle and quick and wrong. Theo moved toward the front window and looked out. A U-Haul truck sat idling at the curb of his driveway. Orange and white. Engine running. The front door opened. Deborah Whitfield walked in first. She had a rolling suitcase in one hand and the expression of someone arriving somewhere they already owned. Behind her, Roland followed with 2 garment bags folded over his arm. Preston came last, a large cardboard box in his hands, and his eyes already scanning the room like he was pricing it. Deborah stopped in the center of the entryway. She looked around the party, at the guests, the food, the house, and then she said it, loud and clear and completely calm. "We live here now." The room went silent. Theo turned to Elena. She was already looking at the floor. Theo moved before he thought about it. He crossed the entryway in 4 steps, touched Elena's elbow, firm, not rough, and said, low and even, "Come with me." She came. He led her down the hall, past the guests who were starting to murmur again, past Margot, who watched from near the kitchen with sharp, quiet eyes. He opened the door to the small room at the end of the hall, the one he'd drywalled and painted 2 months ago, intending it as a home office. Clean white walls, a desk he hadn't assembled yet, 2 folding chairs still in their cardboard sleeves. He closed the door. The murmuring from the party was still there, muffled, like noise heard through water. Theo stood with his back to the door and looked at his wife. "Tell me what just happened," he said. Elena crossed her arms over her chest. She wasn't crying. She looked more like someone waiting for a seatbelt to click. Braced, held in. "My parents lost the house," she said. "The foreclosure finalized 2 months ago." Theo didn't move. 2 months ago? I know how that sounds. I'm not asking how it sounds. I'm asking why I didn't know. She shifted her weight. Her eyes went to the bare wall beside him. I was trying to find another solution first. I didn't want to worry you while you were in the middle of the Clarkson job. And then it kept getting pushed back. I kept meaning to tell you. Meaning to tell me, Theo said. Theo, Preston's room. He said it flat. You said Preston's room. He hadn't. She had. He'd heard it through the door while she was talking to her mother in the entryway, just before he'd guided her down the hall. Your room's the second on the left, Mama. Preston's is across from the bathroom. Elena's jaw tightened. When was that decided? He asked. A pause. Too long. Before tonight? She said. How long before tonight? Another pause. Shorter this time, like she'd already done the math on what she was willing to say. A few weeks ago. Theo nodded once, not in agreement. More the way a man nods when the numbers finally add up to something he didn't want them to add up to. The boxes in the garage, he said. Elena went still. He'd seen them 2 weeks ago, when he'd pulled in late after the Clarkson job ran over. 4 or 5 brown boxes stacked against the far wall. He'd assumed they were Elena's overflow from the office. She was always reorganizing, shifting things. He hadn't asked. He hadn't thought to ask. Now he was asking. Those were theirs, he said. She didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. Theo looked at her for a moment. He felt something move through him, hot and fast and loud, and he let it pass the way he'd learned to let things pass on job sites when a subcontractor made a costly mistake. Reacting didn't fix anything. It just made the mess harder to work through. Preston's furniture, he said. Was that ordered? Her silence stretched out. Elena. Yes, she said quietly. It was ordered. He worked through it in his head. She'd given her family the gate code. She'd allowed deliveries to his house while he was 3 hours away running a project. She'd known, for weeks, maybe longer, that her family was planning to move into a home she'd never once brought up in any conversation about their future. You told me to tell them this was temporary, she said. I'm telling you, it's temporary. They have nowhere to go, Theo. Preston lost his job. My dad's car is about to get repossessed. My mom, how did they get the gate code? She blinked. What? The front gate. He kept his voice even. It's coded. I said it. How did they get it? The question landed differently than she expected. He could tell by the way her eyes shifted. Not guilty, exactly, but recalibrating. I gave it to them, she said, when we knew they'd need to bring the boxes. Theo nodded again. He waited, in case there was more. There wasn't. Okay, he said. Okay? She looked at him carefully. That's it? I need some air. He said it without heat, without edge. Just said it the way you say something true. Go back to your family. He opened the door before she could respond. The backyard was emptier now. A few guests lingered near the far edge of the deck, drinks in hand, talking in the careful way people talk after witnessing something they can't quite categorize. Theo walked past them to the far corner where the deck met the yard. He stood there with his back to the house, looking out at the dark line of trees beyond the fence. He took out his phone. He opened his notes app and typed slowly, deliberately, the way he wrote down measurements on a job site when he didn't want to trust his memory. Check deed, check accounts, check everything. He read it once. Then he put his phone in his pocket, turned around, and walked back inside. His face gave nothing away. The last guest left at 10:30. Theo stood at the front door and shook hands and said the right things. Glad you came, means a lot, drive safe. And then he closed the door, and the house went quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The other kind. He could hear the Whitfields down the hall. Deborah's voice, low and directive. A drawer opening and closing. Preston's footsteps, heavy and unhurried. Crossing what Theo now understood was a bedroom that had been mentally assigned to him long before tonight. Elena found Theo in the entryway. She looked tired. Her mascara had smudged at the corners. We should talk tomorrow, she said. When things are calmer. Sure, he said. She searched his face for something. Anger, maybe, or hurt. And when she didn't find it, she looked almost more unsettled than before. She touched his arm once, then went to bed. Theo stood alone in the entryway of his house for a long moment. Then he went to the home office. He didn't turn on the overhead light, just the desk lamp. It threw a warm yellow circle across the surface of the desk and left the rest of the room in shadow. He opened his laptop. It took him less than 4 minutes to pull up the county property records. He'd bookmarked the page 2 years ago when he'd closed on the land, a habit From years of managing job sites where paperwork disputes could cost a man everything. The record loaded. Owner of record, Theodore James Bryant. He read it twice. Then he sat back and let out a slow breath through his nose. His grandmother had been stubborn about that. 18 months into the marriage, when they'd broken ground and Elena had casually suggested putting both names on the deed, Margot had taken Theo aside at Sunday dinner and told him plainly, "That land came from your grandfather's money and my signature. You put it in both names, you've got two owners. You put it in your name alone, you've got one. Don't let love make you sloppy." He'd done what she said. Elena had let it go without much argument. He hadn't thought about it much since. Tonight, he was grateful in a way that felt like cold water on a burn. He sat with that for a moment. Then, the unease came back. Because the deed being clean didn't answer the other questions. The gate code, the boxes in the garage, the weeks of deliberate silence while a plan was assembled around him. The casual way Elena had given her family access to a home she knew was his alone. Like the name on the deed was just a technicality, something to be worked around in time. He stood up. He told himself he was just going to get a charger. His laptop was at 31%, and the spare was in Elena's office across the hall. Her office door was cracked open. He pushed it with 2 fingers. The room smelled like her. Lavender hand lotion, and the faint chemical smell of printer ink. Neat stacks of folders lined the edge of her desk. Sticky notes on the monitor. A ceramic mug that read, "Good things take time," holding a cluster of pens. He found the charger on the shelf above her printer, uncoiled from a cable wrap, right where it always was. He was turning to go when his eye caught the folder. It wasn't part of the neat stacks. It sat slightly apart from the others, near the right edge of the desk, like it had been set down in a hurry or pulled out recently. A plain manila folder with nothing written on the tab. He stood there. He looked at the door. Listened. The house was quiet. Down the hall, the light under the bedroom door was off. He opened the folder. The document inside was several pages, paper clipped together. The header was clean, professional. A bank letterhead he recognized. The same institution that held his primary business account. Home Equity Line of Credit Application. He read slowly. His contracting background meant he understood loan documents the way other people understood menus, automatically, without having to think about it. The amount was listed. The property listed as collateral was his address. The applicant of record was Elena Bryant, and listed directly beneath her, on the co-borrower line, Roland Whitfield. The application was dated 3 weeks ago. Theo turned to the last page. The signature line read, Theo Bryant. Beneath it, a signature in blue ink. He looked at that signature for a long time. He knew his own handwriting, knew the particular way he crossed his T's, the way the loop in his B never closed all the way. He'd signed his name to hundreds of contracts. Thousands, maybe. That signature was not his. He stood in the dark office with the folder open in his hands and heard, distantly, the sound of Deborah's voice from earlier in the evening. "We live here now." He'd thought that was the problem. He'd spent the whole night thinking the problem was a difficult woman and a cowardly wife, and a boundary that needed enforcing. He looked at the signature again. The suitcases were never the real threat. He took out his phone. He photographed every page, slowly and carefully, making sure each one was in frame and in focus. Then he placed the folder back on the desk, exactly where he'd found it, at the same slight angle from the edge. He turned off the lamp Elena left on and closed the door without a sound. Back at his own desk, he opened a fresh document. He typed 2 words at the top. What I know. Then he started his list. Theo came downstairs at 6:45. He smelled coffee first. Then he heard the cabinets. Deborah was standing in the middle of his kitchen in a floral housecoat and slippers, one cabinet door open. pulling items out and setting them on the counter in deliberate rows. His cast iron skillet, his good mixing bowls, a ceramic canister set Margot had given him at closing. "Morning," Theo said. She didn't turn around. "Your whole system in here is backwards. Pots where the dishes should be. Dishes where the glasses should be. I'm fixing it." "Okay," he said. She paused then, half-turned, like she expected an argument. When she didn't get one, she made a small sound of satisfaction and went back to work. He poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot she'd already made. His coffee, his machine, his grounds, and carried it to the back window. In the yard, through the glass, he could see the light on in the garage gym, the pull-up bar swaying, Preston's silhouette moving behind the frosted panel in the door. Theo had built that gym 2 winters ago. Floor-to-ceiling rubber mats, a power rack he'd assembled himself, a cable machine he'd bought second-hand and refurbished over a weekend. He used it every morning before dawn. He sipped his coffee and said nothing. Then he looked at the key hooks by the back door. There were 4 hooks: his house key, his shop key, his truck key. One hook was empty. He looked out at the driveway. His truck, a black F-250, 3 years old, tool bins bolted to the bed, was gone. Roland's rental sedan sat in its place. Theo held his mug in both hands and breathed through his nose. "Roland borrowed your truck," Deborah said from behind him, as if she'd been waiting for him to notice. "He had some errands. He'll bring it back." "No problem," Theo said. That set the tone for the days that followed. The Whitfields moved through the house like water finding its level. Deborah took over the kitchen entirely by the 3rd day, rearranging not just the cabinets but the pantry, throwing out spices she deemed too old, replacing them with her own brands stacked neatly on shelves she had clearly planned in her head long before she arrived. Preston treated the gym, the television, and the refrigerator as communal property without asking. Roland came and went with the truck, sometimes leaving Theo a note on the kitchen counter, sometimes not. Elena watched all of it and said nothing. She moved around Theo carefully, like a woman waiting for the storm she'd been expecting to finally arrive. When he made dinner and set a place for everyone, she studied him. When he laughed at one of Roland's flat jokes on the back porch, she studied him harder. At night, she lay beside him without touching him, and he could feel her thinking, trying to read something in the dark. He gave her nothing to read. Because while the house was full and loud and claimed in ways that made his jaw tighten at odd moments throughout the day, Theo was working. He started with the bank statements. He had access to everything through his business account's online portal. Every Thursday after supper, he told Elena he was catching up on job invoices, closed the office door, and spent an hour going back through 12 months of records. It took him 2 sessions to find the first transfer. $40? Last April? To a joint account he didn't recognize. He wrote down the account number. He found another one a week later. 60. Then 200 the month after that. Then a series of smaller amounts, 80, 90, 115, irregular enough in timing and size that they wouldn't trip any automated alert, but consistent enough to add up when you were actually looking. He built a spreadsheet. Column A, date. Column B, amount. Column C, cumulative total. By the time he'd gone back 14 months, the cumulative total column read $11,340. He sat with that number for a minute. Then he cross-referenced the joint account number against Elena's personal account statements, which she kept in a filing cabinet she'd never locked because she'd never needed to. The joint account was shared between Elena and Deborah Whitfield. The transfers started 8 months before the foreclosure. The mail came on a Wednesday. Most of it went into the basket by the door. Catalogs, a water bill, a flyer from a roofing supplier. One envelope sat under the rest. Thin and cream-colored return address from a title company he recognized. His name was on it. He opened it in the driveway, standing next to the truck Roland had returned with a half tank of gas missing. Inside was a standard notification letter. A deed amendment request had been submitted for his property. The request asked to add a second owner to the title. The second name was Elena Bryant. The request had been submitted 11 days ago, without his knowledge, without his signature, without a single word to him. He folded the letter, put it in his shirt pocket, and went back inside. He made lunch. He chatted with Deborah about nothing. He watched Preston eat half the leftover pasta from the night before and put the empty container back in the refrigerator. He smiled at the right moments. That evening, he drove to the hardware store for a box of screws he didn't need. He sat in the parking lot with the engine running and found Inez Calloway's name in his phone. He'd known Inez since before the business, before Elena, before any of this. She'd become a real estate attorney with a reputation for being one of the most careful people in any room. She picked up on the second ring. Theo. What's going on? He watched a cart attendant push a line of carts across the lot. Steady. One direction. I need to ask a favor, he said. I think I need to meet. A real meeting, not a phone call. A pause. Inez knew the difference between a favor and a real meeting. When? She said. Soon as you can. Another pause, shorter. What kind of situation are we talking about? Theo looked out at the lot. The automatic doors of the store slid open and closed in the distance. I think I need a lawyer, he said. Not for me. For what's mine? Inez Calloway's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, quiet and clean, with tall windows that let in gray afternoon light. The kind of office where serious things got decided without drama. She was already at her desk when Theo arrived. No hug, no small talk. She pointed to the chair across from her, and he sat. He set his phone on the desk between them without a word. She picked it up. She didn't rush. She moved through the photographs slowly, enlarging them, pinching back out, reading. The HELOC application first. Then the bank transfer screenshots. Then the title company letter, which he'd photographed as well before filing it in the glove box of his truck. Theo watched her face. Inez had a way of going completely still when she was processing something serious. No fidgeting, no expression, just stillness. She set the phone down. The HELOC application, she said. You're certain that's not your signature? I'm certain. How certain? I've signed my name the same way since I was 19 years old. He leaned forward slightly. I sign 40, 50 documents a month for the business. I know what my signature looks like. She nodded once. Forging a signature on a credit application is a felony. Fraud. Full stop. She tapped the desk with one finger. The deed amendment request is also fraud. Submitting an ownership change without the title holder's knowledge or consent. That's not a paperwork error. That's intentional. Theo said nothing. How much do they know that you know? She said. Nothing. Good. She folded her hands. Don't change that yet. Before we take any of this anywhere official, I want a clear, documented pattern. Not one incident, not two. I want a chain. She looked at him directly. Bank records, certified copies, not screenshots. A professional handwriting comparison between that signature and yours. Dated evidence of their occupancy. Photos, receipts, anything with a timestamp. The more thorough the record, the harder it is for anyone to dismiss or explain away. I can do that, Theo said. I know you can. She picked up a pen. How much time do you need? However much it takes to do it right. She looked at him for a moment. Something shifted in her expression, too brief to name. Okay, she said. Do it right. He spent the next several days building the file. He requested certified copies of his business account statements at the bank branch on Morrow Street, telling the teller it was for an audit. He sat at his desk each night after the house went quiet and laid the statements out in order, photographing each page in good light, then organizing everything in a folder he kept locked in his truck. He printed a page of his own signatures, contracts, invoices, a client letter from that same month, and held them next to the photograph of the HELOC document. The difference wasn't subtle. His signature had a specific break between the T and the H, a small habit he'd developed so long ago it was automatic. The forged version was smooth where his was broken. Someone had tried. They just hadn't known about the break. He documented the occupancy without making it obvious. A photo of Preston's gym bag on his power rack, time-stamped. A shot of Deborah's pantry reorganization, the shelf tags still in her handwriting. Roland's tools spread across the garage workbench next to Theo's own. He kept a running notes file on his phone, logging dates, times, and what he observed each day. Simple language, specific details. He was thorough. He'd spent 15 years managing job sites, where a missing detail could become a lawsuit. He knew how to document. The call from Marcus Webb came on a Thursday. Marcus ran a small framing crew and had been a subcontractor of Theo's for years. Steady work. No drama. When his number appeared on Theo's screen mid-afternoon, Theo stepped away from the back porch and answered. "Hey, Marcus! What's up? Man, I don't even know how to start this." Marcus's voice was careful. "You know a residential job over on Callahan Drive? Bathroom addition? Partial foundation work?" "No," Theo said. "I don't have anything on Callahan." Silence on the other end. "The permit pulled for that job," Marcus said slowly. "It's got your license number on it." Theo went still. "Say that again." "Your license number, Theo. It's on the permit." "I saw it because I almost bid the job before I found out it was already under contract. I figured you'd picked it up quiet and didn't mention it, but something felt off, so I asked around." A pause. "Guy who answered for the contractor on record?" "Not you. I've never heard his voice before." Theo didn't say anything for a moment. "There's also a lien," Marcus said. "Filed 2 weeks ago. Unpaid materials on that same job. Under your license number." Theo pressed the heel of his hand against the truck door and held it there. "Thanks, Marcus," he said. "I mean it. You good?" "Yeah," Theo said. "I'm good." He ended the call and stood there in the driveway for a moment. Then he pulled up Preston's name in his mind, alongside the one detail he'd quietly noted weeks ago. Preston, bragging casually to Roland at dinner about a little side work he'd picked up. Theo had filed it away. Now he understood what it meant. He pulled the permit records himself that evening through the county's online database, using the license number he'd had for 11 years. 2 jobs, both residential, both permitted under his credentials. Neither one he had authorized, contracted, or even heard of until now. He photographed the records and added them to the folder. Then he forwarded everything to Inez: the certified bank statements, the signature comparison photos, the occupancy documentation, the permit records, and the lien notice with his license number attached to work he'd never agreed to do. Her reply came 40 minutes later. "This is enough. We can move. Say the word." He read it twice. Then he typed back, "Not yet. I want to see how far they'll push." The invitation came on a Tuesday. Deborah left a note on the kitchen counter, handwritten in her looping cursive, informing Theo that she had planned a family dinner for Thursday evening, 7 o'clock, so we can talk things through like family. She'd already written a grocery list on the back and circled 3 items, which meant she expected him to buy them. He bought them. Thursday came cold and still. Deborah had rearranged the dining room chairs since the last time Theo had sat in them, pulling his chair, the one at the head of the table, slightly off-center, just enough that it no longer lined up with the window behind it. It probably meant nothing. He noted it anyway. She cooked for 2 hours. Roland set the table without being asked. Preston arrived from wherever Preston went during the day and dropped into a chair without offering to help. Elena moved between the kitchen and the dining room with a careful smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Theo sat and ate and listened. The food was good. He gave her that. Deborah waited until the plates were mostly cleared before she started. She did it the way she always did things, casually, like the thought had just occurred to her. "Theo, I've been thinking." She folded her hands on the table. With all of us living here now, it might be worth talking to someone about the financials. A tax person, maybe. Because the way property works, if the house is only in one name, you're actually leaving money on the table. Theo picked up his water glass. Is that right? Roland looked into it a little. She gestured toward her husband like he was a prop. Adding a co-owner, even partial, can open up deductions. Protect the estate down the line, she smiled. It's really more of a planning thing than anything else. Theo set the glass down. What percentage were you thinking? Deborah's smile widened slightly. Just slightly. Oh, something small. Symbolic, really. Just enough to make it official for the paperwork. Official? Inez had used a different word. She'd called it irreversible. That's interesting, Theo said. I'd have to look into it. Talk to my accountant. Of course. Deborah waved a hand. No rush. Just something to keep in mind. She moved on to dessert like the conversation had resolved itself. Roland helped clear plates. Preston pulled out his phone. The table relaxed. All except Elena. She was watching him from across the table with an expression he hadn't seen from her before. Not guilt. She'd been wearing that for weeks. This was something different. Something sharper. Her eyes tracked him the way you tracked a person you were no longer sure about, searching his face for the reaction that never came. He gave her nothing. He smiled when Deborah made a joke. He helped Roland carry dishes to the sink. He thanked Deborah for cooking and meant none of it. By 8:30, he was in his truck. His grandmother's house was 20 minutes south, a small brick ranch on a corner lot she'd lived in for 31 years. The porch light was on when he pulled up. It was always on after dark. Margot met him at the door before he knocked. She had a way of knowing. You look like you've been carrying something heavy for a while, she said, stepping back to let him in. I'm fine, Grandma. I didn't ask if you were fine. She pointed to the couch. Sit down. He sat. She lowered herself into the chair across from him, the one with the worn armrest, and looked at him straight. Tell me, she said. So he told her. All of it. The HELOC application with his forged name. The deed amendment submitted without his knowledge. The diverted money. 12 months of transfers, steady and quiet, bleeding his business account into a joint account he'd never seen. Preston's scheme, the unauthorized permits, the lien, the folder in Elena's office, the folder locked in his truck. Margot didn't interrupt. She sat with her hands in her lap and let him talk. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. 15 years ago, she said, I co-signed that first loan because I knew what you were going to do with it. Not because I thought you might, because I knew. She looked at him steadily. I watched you build that business with your hands. I watched you buy that land, draw those plans, lay that foundation yourself. Nobody gave you that house, Theo. You made it. Every single piece of it. He nodded slowly. Don't you let guilt take it from you, she said. Her voice was quiet, but there was no softness in it. Not love, not loyalty, not one drop of hesitation. She pointed at him. That house is yours. Act like it. He left an hour later with her words sitting solid in his chest. He was 10 minutes from home when his phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Inez. He read it at a red light. Handwriting analysis confirmed. HELOC's signature is a forgery. Also, license investigation turned up 3 more unauthorized jobs under your name. Total is 5. Call me tomorrow. The light turned green. He typed back with his thumb, 1 word, and drove home. Ready. Theo brought it up on Friday morning. He found the family at breakfast, Deborah at the stove, Roland reading something on his tablet, Preston eating cereal standing up at the counter. Elena was pouring coffee. The kitchen smelled like butter and toast, and the morning light came through the window Theo had installed himself, the one with the wide sill he'd framed from reclaimed oak. I've been thinking, he said. Deborah looked up from the stove. We should get together this weekend. All of us. Some of the neighbors. Maybe a few of your people." He pulled out a chair and sat down easy, like a man with nothing on his mind. "Figure out permanent arrangements. Put everything on the table and make it official." The word official landed exactly the way he intended. Deborah turned fully away from the stove. "This weekend?" "Saturday evening," Theo said. "I'll handle the food." Something moved across Deborah's face. Relief, mostly. But underneath it, something that looked a lot like triumph. "I think that's a wonderful idea," she said. Roland set his tablet down. Preston stopped chewing. Elena was very still near the coffee maker. "Good." Theo stood up, pocketed his phone, and grabbed his keys from the hook by the door. The hook Roland had twice left empty when he borrowed the truck. "I've got some things to pick up. I'll be back this afternoon." He left before anyone could ask questions. Inez's office smelled like printer ink and cold coffee. She had everything spread across the conference table by the time Theo arrived. Bank records in one stack, the photographed HELOC application in another, and a manila envelope near the far corner that she pushed toward him when he sat down. "That came from the investigator this morning," she said. Theo opened it. Inside were 5 job bids, printed on paper that carried his company's letterhead. Letterhead he hadn't generated. Each one had his contractor license number at the bottom. 3 were for jobs that had already been completed. The other 2 were still outstanding, and one of them carried a lien filed against his name for materials the client claimed were never delivered. "Preston used your number to register with 2 of these suppliers," Inez said, tapping the 3rd page. "They have his handwriting on the intake forms." "His, not yours." Theo set the papers down. "How's the forgery documentation look?" "Tight." Inez pulled the handwriting report in front of her. "The analyst's conclusion is unambiguous. The HELOC signature doesn't match any sample of your handwriting across 4 verified documents. Different pen pressure, different letter spacing, different slant." She looked up. Elena had notary access through her job. "We believe she used it." Theo nodded once. "I've been in contact with Detective Ruiz at the County Fraud Unit," Inez continued. "He's reviewed the file. They'll have 2 officers available Saturday evening, off-site, ready to move when we call." She folded her hands. "The locksmith." "On standby. He'll park a street over." "Good." Inez looked at him steadily. "Once we start, it moves fast. You understand that?" "I understand." "There's no pause button." "Inez." He met her eyes. "I'm ready." She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded, and started organizing the papers into a single folder. Elena caught him Friday night, in the hallway outside their bedroom. He'd just come out of the bathroom and she was waiting there, arms crossed loosely, leaning against the wall, not blocking him, just standing in a way that said she'd been thinking about this for a while. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Sure." He kept his voice easy. "Alone." "We're alone now." She looked at him for a long moment. The hallway light was dim, and the shadows made her expression hard to read, but her eyes were searching his face, the same way they had at the dinner table, looking for the seam, trying to find where the calm ended. "You seem different lately," she said. "Do I?" "Theo." Her voice dipped. "The gathering tomorrow. What is that really about?" He tilted his head slightly. "What do you mean?" "It's what I said. Permanent arrangements." He gave her a small, flat smile. "Your mom seemed happy about it. She's already called 3 people. She's treating it like a—" Elena stopped herself. "Like a what?" She shook her head. "Never mind. I just want to know that we're okay." He looked at her for a beat. "Just long enough. Get some sleep, Elena." He walked past her into the bedroom, and she didn't follow right away. Saturday arrived gray and cool. By 6 o'clock, the house was filling up. Neighbors, a few of the Whitfield's cousins, one of Deborah's friends from church. Preston had actually showered. Roland was playing host with a drink in his hand like it was his own home. Deborah stood near the fireplace in a deep burgundy blouse, holding a glass of wine, already positioned like a woman preparing to address a room. Theo's phone buzzed in his pocket. He looked down at the screen. Everyone's in position. Say the word. Inez. He slid the phone back into his pocket and looked up. Deborah raised her glass. The room settled naturally, the way rooms do when someone with a loud enough presence signals they have something to say. Conversations tapered. A few people turned. Preston leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, looking pleased with himself. Roland stood slightly behind Deborah, drink in hand, nodding before she'd said a single word. "I just want to take a moment," Deborah began, her voice warm and carrying, "to say how grateful we are." "Hold on." Theo's voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. He stepped forward from the edge of the room, unhurried, and every head turned toward him. Deborah paused mid-breath, glass still raised, her smile fixed in place while her eyes recalculated. "I've got a few things I'd like to put on the table first," Theo said, "since that's what tonight is for." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded set of papers. He opened them and set them flat on the coffee table in the center of the room, smoothing the edges with one hand. "3 weeks before you all showed up with your suitcases," he said, "someone submitted a home equity line of credit application using this property as collateral." He tapped the first page. "Whoever submitted it listed Roland Whitfield as a co-borrower." He paused and signed my name to the bottom. The room went very quiet. "That's my signature line," he continued, calm as a man reading a weather report. "That is not my signature." Deborah lowered her glass. "A certified handwriting analyst confirmed it," Theo said. "Different pen pressure, different letter spacing, different slant. Not my handwriting." He looked up. "Elena has notary access through her job. The application was notarized." Elena's face went the color of dry concrete. He moved to the second page. Around the same time, someone submitted a request to a title company to add a name to this property's deed. "This house," he let that sit for a second, "a house that is solely and legally in my name, has been since the day I built it." The request was rejected, but it was submitted. A woman near the back, one of Deborah's church friends, made a small sound. "Third." Theo picked up a bank statement, printed clean and clear. "Over the past 14 months, money was moved out of my business account. Regular transfers, small enough not to trigger alerts, into a joint account." He glanced at Elena. "An account that she and Deborah share." He set the statement down. "I never authorized those transfers. They totaled just over $22,000. Preston pushed off the wall. "And fourth," Theo turned toward him, "someone's been running jobs using my contractor's license number, bidding work, collecting materials, leaving liens in my name for jobs that were never finished." He reached back into the folder and laid out a printed bid sheet, the company letterhead, the license number, the handwriting on the intake forms. "That's your handwriting, Preston." Preston's jaw tightened. "You can't prove—" "The suppliers have your intake forms," Theo said simply. "The investigator I hired does too." The silence in the room had weight to it now. It pressed down on everything. Elena stepped forward. "Theo," her voice cracked. "Theo, just let me explain, okay? It's more complicated than—" "I've already filed the police reports," he said. "The fraud investigation is active." She stopped. Inez moved through the gathered guests from the far side of the room, stepping forward until she was standing beside Theo. She looked at the room with the kind of expression that left no room for negotiation. "The filings are on record with the County Fraud Unit," Inez said. "The forgery, the deed fraud, the financial transfers, and the unauthorized use of a licensed contractor's credentials. Those are not allegations." She held the room's eyes steadily. "They are active charges." Roland set his drink down on the mantel. "This was Deborah's idea," he said, his voice dropping to something that was trying to sound measured, but came out thin and scared. "The paperwork, all of it. I told her." "Don't." Deborah turned on him, her voice cracking like a whip. "Do not stand there and act like you didn't sign what I put in front of you. Because you said it was routine. It was for the family. You used my house, Theo said. Both of them stopped. You forged my name. His voice stayed even, but each word landed separately, like something being set down on concrete. You took money from the business I built. You used my license, he turned briefly to Preston, to run jobs that put liens on my reputation. He folded the papers and put them back in his jacket. And not one of you thought I'd notice. Or maybe you just didn't think it mattered. Deborah straightened. Her chin came up. We had nowhere to go, she said, and her voice wrapped itself in a kind of wounded dignity that turned Theo's stomach. Everything we did was out of necessity. You wouldn't understand what that kind of pressure. A knock sounded at the front door. Theo turned away from her and walked across the room to answer it himself. Theo opened the door. 2 officers stood on the porch, both in uniform, both calm. The one in front was a broad-shouldered man with a trim beard and a clipboard tucked under one arm. Behind them, at the edge of the driveway, a third man stood beside a van with a small logo on the side panel. A locksmith, tools already on his belt. "Mr. Bryant," the officer said. "That's me." "Officer Dales. This is Officer Reyes." He nodded toward his partner. "We're here in connection with the fraud reports filed earlier this week. You made contact with the licensing board regarding unauthorized use of your contractor credentials, and with the county fraud unit regarding the forged financial documents?" "I did." Theo stepped to the side and held the door open. "Come in." They walked in together, and the room rearranged itself around them. Some guests drifted toward the walls. A few headed quietly for the door, giving Theo a look on their way out, something between sympathy and respect. Deborah had not moved. She stood near the fireplace with her arms crossed and her chin still raised, as if the officer's presence was a social inconvenience rather than anything that applied to her. Officer Dales looked at the room. "Which one of you is Preston Whitfield?" Preston came off the wall. He looked at the officers the way someone looks at a car alarm, annoyed, convinced it would stop on its own. "That's me." Dales nodded. He opened the clipboard. "We need to speak with you regarding job bids submitted under license number CTL 44B71. B. Contractor license registered to Theodore Bryant. There are 3 outstanding complaints from subcontractors, and 1 unresolved lien filed under that number for work you performed without the license holder's knowledge or consent." Preston opened his mouth. "That's a Class 5 misdemeanor at minimum," Dales continued, before Preston could get a single word out. "And depending on what the board finds, it can rise to felony fraud. We're going to need you to come with us to answer some questions." He paused. "You're not being arrested tonight, but you are required to cooperate." Preston looked at Theo. Theo looked back at him without any particular expression. Reyes had already moved toward Roland and Deborah. He held a copy of the HELOC application in a clear evidence sleeve. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield, Roland and Deborah?" Roland cleared his throat. "Yes. You're named in a forgery complaint related to this document. A home equity line of credit application listing Roland Whitfield as co-borrower, submitted with a forged signature under the name Theodore Bryant." Reyes kept his voice professional even, like a man reading out a grocery list. "We'll need formal statements from both of you. A representative from the county fraud unit will contact you to schedule that within 48 hours. "This is outrageous," Deborah said. Her voice came out the same way it always did, full and certain, but underneath it, something had shifted. A hairline crack. "We are his family. This is a family matter." "It stopped being a family matter when someone forged his name on a legal document," Reyes said simply. Deborah turned to Roland. Roland was staring at the floor. While the officers finished with the family, Theo walked back to the front door and waved in the locksmith. The man came in with his bag over one shoulder and headed directly toward the front door hardware without needing to be told twice. And that was when it seemed to land for Deborah. She watched the locksmith pull out his tools and get to work on the deadbolt, and her face shifted the way a mask shifts when the string snaps. Not grief, something rawer than that. She looked at Theo like she was seeing him for the first time. "You can't do this," she said. Low now, the crowd-carrying warmth stripped out of her voice entirely. "This is my house," Theo said. "It's always been my house." She looked around the room, at Inez, at the officers, at the guests still hovering near the walls. She was calculating, the way she always calculated, searching for the angle, the social pressure, the room full of witnesses she could turn into her audience. There was nothing to turn. There was no audience left to work. Preston left with the officers shortly after, quiet in a way he'd never been since the day he arrived. Roland and Deborah were instructed to make arrangements that evening and to be off the premises by the following morning, given formal written notice that Inez slid into Roland's hands before he could object. He took it without a word. Then Theo found Elena. She was standing in the hallway, near the door to the room she'd been using as a home base since her family arrived, the room where he'd found the folder. She was looking at the floor, her arms folded around herself, and she didn't look up when he approached. He held out an envelope. She stared at it. "Divorce papers," he said quietly. "Inez drafted them. There's a prenup attached." Elena looked up at him then. Her eyes were red at the edges. "Theo, the prenup protects the house," he said, "and the business. Completely." He kept his voice even, without satisfaction or cruelty. "Your family called it paranoid when we signed it." He paused. "I remember." She took the envelope. By midnight, the house was quiet. The Whitfields were gone. Their bags, their boxes, their presents, cleared out room by room over the prior 2 hours, loaded into Roland's truck in silence, while the new locks were fitted to every exterior door. Theo stood in his kitchen alone. The lights were low. The counters were bare. Deborah's rearranged cabinet contents were still wrong. He'd fix that tomorrow. But the room was his again, in a way he could feel in his chest. He braced both hands on the edge of the counter, looked down at the grain of the wood he'd chosen, and installed himself, and exhaled, long and slow, all the way out. The afternoon sun came in low and gold over the backyard fence, and the smell of cedar and charcoal drifted up from somewhere near the deck. Theo stood on the front porch with a glass of lemonade in one hand, watching his grandmother work. Margot Sims, 71 years old, 5'3", and completely incapable of standing still at a social gathering, was directing foot traffic through the side gate with the calm authority of a woman who had built things herself. She pointed one couple toward the coolers, redirected a neighbor toward the food table, and waved down a man who was trying to park too close to the mailbox, all without raising her voice once. "Around back," she called out to a pair of contractors Theo knew from a job site in the spring. "Follow the noise. You'll find it." They smiled and followed her directions without question. Theo watched her and felt something settle in his chest. She'd moved into the guest suite 8 months ago. His invitation. His idea. The suite had its own entrance off the side hallway. He'd designed it that way deliberately when he was drawing the original plans, though he hadn't known then who would use it. It suited Margot completely. She had her own space, her own routine, her own keys. She never rearranged anything without asking. She knocked on doors. That detail still meant more to him than he could fully put into words. A year had changed the house, not the structure. The walls and floors and trim were exactly as he'd built them, but the feeling inside them. His contracting business had grown steadily in the months since the fraud case had closed. The licensing board's investigation wrapped up in the spring, and the official findings had cleared his name on every outstanding complaint. His attorney had made sure the conclusions were filed as public record. 3 clients who had pulled back during the uncertainty came back with bigger jobs. 4 new ones came in through referrals from people who'd watched how he handled the situation, quietly, methodically, without burning down more than what needed to burn. One client had told him straight, "The way you handled that thing with the license fraud, I trust you more now than before it happened." Theo had thanked him and gotten back to work. The divorce from Elena had finalized in April. Clean, documented, final. The prenup Inez had drafted years earlier, the one Deborah had called excessive, that Roland had laughed off over a holiday dinner, that Elena had signed with an eye roll and the confidence that it would never matter, had held up in every detail. The house was his. The business was his. There were no disputes, no contested assets. Inez had called him the morning the paperwork was processed. "It's done," he'd said. "Thank you," and meant it with everything he had. The updates about the Whitfields had come to him in pieces over the months, through Inez mostly, and once through a contractor colleague who'd crossed paths with Roland at a supply warehouse. Deborah and Roland were renting a 2-bedroom apartment across town. They'd applied for 2 different housing programs and been turned down from both, the fraud case still attached to their names like a shadow. Deborah, by all accounts, was still explaining to anyone who would listen how none of it had been her fault. Preston could no longer work in the trades. His fraud conviction had pulled his eligibility for any contractor licensing in the state permanently. He was doing general labor somewhere. The colleague hadn't been sure where. It didn't matter much to Theo. Elena was living in a studio apartment about 20 minutes away. She was working the same job she'd had before, real estate admin, but she was doing it alone, distanced from the family that had used her compliance like a tool until it wore out. Theo didn't know much else about her life, and didn't look for more. He hoped she was okay. He meant that sincerely, the way you mean it about someone who was once important to you and has now become a stranger. You pass on the edge of your thoughts. He was not angry anymore. Anger had served its purpose, and then he'd set it down. Margot appeared at the base of the porch steps, looking up at him with her arms crossed and one eyebrow raised. "You going to stand out here all evening," she said, "or are you going to come be with your people? I was watching you work. I stopped needing a supervisor about 40 years ago." She tilted her head toward the backyard. "Come on." He followed her through the side gate. The backyard was full. People moved between the deck and the lawn, drinks in hand, voices loose and easy the way voices get when no one is performing. These were his people, friends from the trade, neighbors who'd waved at him from across the street all year. Inez near the far railing, talking to a couple he'd introduced her to last spring. Margot settled into a chair near the edge of the deck, like she'd always lived there, because she did. Theo moved to the center of the deck. Someone handed him a drink. He raised it, and the people closest to him raised theirs back, not because they'd been told to, but because the moment asked for it. He looked out at the yard, at the deck he'd framed himself, at the fence posts he'd set by hand, at the house that rose behind him, solid and exactly as he'd planned it. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.